and today we are finally going to be getting on our boat, if we can ever get Jen out of bed. Sorong is a city of 300,000 people or so, but it's not really much of a tourist destination in and of itself. Its main claim to fame seemed to be the fact that it acted as a gateway into Raja Ampat thanks to the airport and the harbor. When we booked this trip, we found that there were two main tourist hotel options, one of which was the Aston. We decided on that because it was close to the airport, so we figured it'd be a little bit easier. And when we looked at the flights, we had ended up arriving an entire day before the boat left, just so we were sure we didn't miss our boat. We spent most of our downtime sleeping, eating, or madly planning future adventures, because Christmas 2025 is only, a year away at this point. The Aston was quite nice, but the food was a bit on the limited and overly fried side. The one exception was the breakfast, which was this massive buffet with all sorts of interesting things to try. An unfortunate amount of which did include fish or seafood. Also, the less said about the coffee, the better. I had thought ahead enough to pack some Starbucks Via packets, but I ended up wishing that I'd brought quite a bit more. Finally, at 11 a.m. Christmas Eve, we were met by a transfer shuttle out front and taken across town to the harbor. Based on our experience walking from the airport to the hotel, I hadn't been in a real hurry to explore the area on foot, so this was our one chance to see a bit of the city. Once we arrived at the harbor, we were loaded onto a dinghy along with our luggage and ferried out to the Ilike. Interestingly enough, we actually passed right by the other boat that we'd almost decided on. The Blue Manta had been tempting, but it had 12 more guests total and it had been a bit more expensive. And as always, our priorities are all about the diving. In the end, we'd settled on the Ilike. It jumped out as quite unique looking compared to the handful of other liveaboards we've done. It's a Panisi-style boat made out of wood instead of the usual metal. I don't want to go down too much of a rabbit hole here, but if you Google the origin of the word boogeyman, it actually involves this style ship and the Bugis shipbuilders that made them. We also just happened to get to see one of these being constructed way back in 2019 during our first trip out to Komodo. If you're wondering about the sails, so did we. We asked, and they're basically just for show at this point. The boat has two 320 horsepower engines, and that's what drives it through the water. The sails are only ever unfurled for photos, and apparently that can only be done when there isn't much wind. Other than the wooden construction, the other big difference from the other liveaboards we've been on is the fact that the dive deck is actually located on the bow instead of the back. I had wondered about this since generally the dive deck is in the back, so you have easy access to the waterline to get on and off dinghies. Instead, the boat had a small platform and stairs on the port side which almost led up to the dive deck. I say almost because there was actually this big step up you had to do that was varying levels of difficult depending on the time of day. We were welcomed on board by Clement, the cruise director, and after some easy paperwork he gave us a brief tour covering the safety features of the boat, and we got underway. Apparently we'd been the last of the 16 guests to arrive. So right now they are checking in with the park, and we're just kind of getting sorted, and diving starts tomorrow. The boat does actually have a Starlink antenna there, but it's $90 for 15 gigs, which is a little too rich for us here. Plus, I'm somewhat notorious for using a lot of data. So it is pretty nice out here, but there is a ton of boat traffic. They warned us if we were going to go swimming to be careful. The Ilike was built in 2010 and was previously a surf liveaboard before being converted over for diving. It's 32 meters long and it has a crew of 16 in addition to the 16 guests that make up a full trip. The lower deck is mostly sleeping quarters accessed from the galley. As kind of a neat touch, the hull actually had these steps that you could use to climb out in an emergency, and the light is coming from a skylight, which is also the table on the dive deck. There are 8 cabins designed for double or triple occupancy, of which we had booked what they call the superior cabin. There was an en-suite bathroom, and it was actually quite nice with plenty of room to sleep and store what we had with us. They also have 2 of these cabins that they call standard. I didn't get to stick my head in one of them, but I think what the deal is they're just pressed up against the bulkhead that's shared with the engine room, which honestly, it wouldn't be that big a deal because I'd actually rather have engine noise than hear people snoring in the next room. They also had 2 suites. This is the lower one that was right next to us. Jen was actually willing to book this, and it is quite the space upgrade, but I kind of thought, why bother? We're not going to be in the room all that much when we're not sleeping. They also had one super fancy cabin up top called the Sea View Suite. It did look super nice online just because it had these windows which opened up on the ocean. But here's the thing. This is a 32-meter boat that has 32 people on board. While people do generally try and be very respectful of space on something like this, you would have a pretty constant stream of people walking by and looking in. Not to mention hanging out and smoking on the sun deck, which is your roof. In the end, if we went on this boat again, I would be inclined to stick with either the Superior or the standard cabins. Also on the lower deck was the engine room, which we only got to tour very, very briefly right at the end, and crew quarters. On the main deck, starting at the back, there was a dining area, which was also where all the dive briefings were held. In front of that was stairs down to the engine room, cruise director quarters, and then the kitchen area. Breakfast and lunch were served here buffet style, while dinners were brought out to us. There was also a small amount of seating here, but honestly it was usually nicer just to be in the dining area. In front of that was a camera storage area and also a charging station. Pretty much every boat I've been on the last however many years has had one of these due to the concerns of lithium batteries catching fire and burning the boat down. So you're required to charge everything out here where the ship watch can keep an eye on them instead of in your room. Something I really liked was in the same area they had a set of drawers, one for each diver. This let us have a dry place where we could leave things like phones and sunglasses when we went out to dive without having to go all the way back down to our room. In front of that was the dive deck, which I also really liked. It was spread out, it was open, and I probably would have been hanging out there a lot more than I was if it wasn't for some rather enthusiastic smokers who were also on the boat. The top deck had the wheelhouse and the Sea View Suite, and then a ladder leading up to the sun deck. While we generally tried to avoid additional sun exposure considering our lifestyle, it was really, really nice up there right around sunset. For logistical reasons, we wouldn't be diving until the following day, so we had plenty of time to settle in, do some general briefings on the area and the boat, and get prepared for the following morning, at which point we would be diving pretty much constantly. 9 o'clock, everybody's already turned in. We have our first big day of diving tomorrow. Home sweet home.